The silence in the room was sharp, like the air had been cut with a blade. Every camera turned. Every journalist leaned forward. The hall, grand and heavy with golden flags and polished wood, had seen many moments of tension. But not like this. Donald J. Trump had just stopped mid-step. His eyes landed on the nameplate beside his, a simple card that read, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso. His face tensed. He didn't speak. He only shook his head and whispered something to his aide. What happened next was fast, but unforgettable. A summit staffer rushed over, gently lifted Trump's nameplate from the table, and walked it across the room. He placed it on a chair far from Traoré. The shift was loud, even though no words were spoken. Cameras zoomed in. Delegates murmured. The world blinked. And yet, Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't even move. He sat there, calm, solid, eyes steady on Trump across the room. Then he leaned into the microphone and said, in a voice both soft and thunderous, "If a man refuses to sit beside you, ask yourself, what truth does he fear?" The room froze. Even before the summit had officially begun, the entire world was watching, and no one could look away. Now let me take you back, before the gasps, before the silence, before the world shifted, to where this story really began. The city was Geneva. The air was cold, but the stakes were burning. It was the United Nations Global Security Summit, and for the first time in decades, the spotlight wasn't on the West. It was on a young African soldier from a small country often dismissed as poor, unstable, forgettable, Burkina Faso. And standing at its front was Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the youngest head of state in the world. A man who had risen not by election, but by uprising, not through politics, but through principle. He had taken power when his country could no longer wait. While the powerful dined and debated, children in his villages drank from muddy wells and mothers gave birth by candlelight. He wasn't supposed to lead, but he did. He wasn't meant to survive, but he had. And now, here he was, invited to speak among kings and presidents, oil barons and defense ministers. But not everyone welcomed him. Behind the scenes, whispers ran like cold water through diplomatic hallways. He's too bold. He's a puppet of Russia. He's disrupting the balance. But the truth was simpler. He was breaking the rules of silence. In months prior, Traoré had shut down foreign military bases, reclaimed gold mines held by foreign corporations, and returned the profits to his people. He banned NGOs that exploited suffering. He told the truth about hunger, corruption, and who profits from African misery. So when he walked into the summit hall that day, he walked in not just as a man, but as a message. But power does not welcome disruption. And that's why, when Trump saw his name next to Traoré, he chose to walk away. If this message resonates with you, take a second to like this video. Share it if you believe Africa deserves more than silence. Back in the room, as the nameplates shifted and the tension thickened, Traoré sat still. His calm was louder than protest. His silence burned more than speech. Reporters tweeted in real time. Did Trump just snub the leader of Burkina Faso? Captain Traoré remained silent. But something is coming. And they were right. Because in that silence, Traoré was holding back a storm. He had seen too much to be shaken by a snub. Too many children crying from hunger. Too many brothers lost to bullets. Too many promises broken by those who stood on podiums like this one and spoke of democracy while stealing everything they could. Across from him, Trump sat now, rigid, arms crossed, lips tight. But Traoré was unbothered. He looked out at the room, full of polished leaders and expensive suits, and then leaned forward again. My people do not eat speeches. They eat rice. They drink clean water. They sleep in peace. I did not come for politics. I came for life. And in that moment, something shifted. From the back of the hall, a woman with gray hair and a French accent stood up. She didn't wait for permission. I have sat in these rooms for 30 years, she said, her voice trembling, and I have never seen anyone speak like this. Without anger, without fear, with truth. She pointed toward him. Captain, you remind me of Lumumba, of Sankara. You speak for Africa, but somehow you speak for all of us. The room was still. Traoré didn't smile. He simply nodded, not proud, not boastful, just thankful and still. And at the edge of the hall, a single protest chant began to rise from outside the summit walls. Dignity for Africa. The sound would grow louder. But what happened next inside, no one could have prepared for. If this moment moved you, subscribe and share this story, because the world must hear not just the noise of power, but the whispers of dignity. Outside the summit, the protests were growing. Hundreds had gathered, some waving flags, others holding up cardboard signs painted by hand. Dignity for Africa. Stand with Traoré. Let truth speak. The security team tried to keep the crowd behind barriers, but the energy couldn't be contained. Students, doctors, exiled journalists, even retired U.S. veterans stood shoulder to shoulder. They weren't just there for Burkina Faso. They were there for justice. Inside, delegates' phones buzzed with updates. Screens lit up with live streams. The hall, filled with people in $1,000 suits, couldn't ignore what was happening just beyond the glass walls. But at the center of it all, Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat quietly, eyes lowered, shoulders square. Not a single part of him begged for attention. And yet, every camera in the room stayed locked on him, because everyone knew something else was coming. He had not come here for applause. He had not come to make friends. He had come with the stories of his people burning inside his chest like a fire he couldn't put out. The faces of hungry children. The eyes of mothers feeding 3 children with 1 boiled yam. The dusty streets of Ouagadougou, where elders still carried buckets just to find clean water. He had carried those memories with him through coups, threats, and betrayal, all the way to Geneva. And still, the man across the room wouldn't even sit next to him. Donald Trump stayed cold, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. It was as if the growing storm outside meant nothing to him. But it meant everything. Because for the first time, the voice of a so-called small country had pierced the heart of global power, and the world was watching. Then, something no one saw coming. From the corner of the room, a small hand went up. A teenager, nervous, his voice trembling. The moderator blinked. "You're not on the list." But the boy didn't sit down. He stood tall, even though his knees were shaking. "My name is Kofi," he said. "I was born in a refugee camp in Niger. I watched my father die, waiting for medicine that never came. But last year, I heard about a young captain who took back gold stolen from the people and gave it back." The room went silent again. "Captain Traoré, you inspired me. Today, I skipped school just to see you speak." No one moved. Even Trump turned his head slightly. Traoré rose slowly. He didn't speak. He simply walked to the boy, placed a hand on his shoulder, and gave him a small, silent nod. That one gesture, simple, quiet, human, spoke louder than every speech given that day. And then, Trump tapped his mic. Cameras jerked toward him. The moderators held their breath. Would he finally explain why he refused to sit next to Traoré? He didn't. He adjusted his suit, stood up, and walked out of the summit. No words, no warning, just gone. Gasps echoed through the hall. One delegate whispered, "He's walking away from the conversation," and the cameras caught every step. Traoré, still silent, still. But behind his calm eyes, a storm of memory and meaning raged. If you're still watching, take a second to share this video. Because what's happening here isn't just about 2 men, it's about all of us. Traoré leaned into the mic again. When silence becomes a tool of power, we must answer with truth, not rage. The room erupted. Some clapped. Some cried. Some just stood frozen, not knowing what to do with the truth they had just heard. But inside Traoré, something deeper was stirring. He wasn't angry. He was tired. Tired of African leaders being laughed at behind closed doors. Tired of begging for loans while his people slept beside dry wells and war scars. Tired of walking into rooms he had earned his way into, only to be treated like a guest. Still, he carried himself with dignity, because this was no longer about ego. This was about generations. He remembered the land his grandfather tilled with his bare hands, the salt on his father's back, the children who had no shoes, yet danced in the red dirt like kings. That was Burkina Faso, and it was time the world saw their worth. Then, just as the applause quieted, another voice broke the silence. A young woman stood, not from Africa, but from Canada. "I must speak," she said, voice shaking. "I come from privilege, but my heart aches for the people Captain Traoré represents." She paused, then looked straight at him. "You remind us that leadership is not about having power, but about carrying pain." And for a brief moment, the distance between nations seemed smaller. Even Trump, wherever he had gone, couldn't stop what was unfolding now. The summit wasn't about climate or oil or security anymore. It was about truth, dignity, presence. And Ibrahim Traoré, a man from a country the world tried to ignore, had just shifted the room without raising his voice. But the story wasn't over yet, because the final words of the summit still belonged to him, and the world was waiting. If this story moves something in you, subscribe and share, not for views, but because voices like this deserve to be heard, not silenced. The hall was quiet again, not the kind of quiet you hear at fancy dinners or political speeches, but a deep, heavy stillness, the kind that comes right before a storm or a sacred truth. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood. The spotlight found him without anyone saying a word. He didn't grab the mic. He didn't adjust his suit. He didn't need to. The weight of everything, of history, of sacrifice, of betrayal, was in his eyes. He looked at the crowd. Diplomats, reporters, generals. They had seen presidents fall and wars begin. But now they were watching a young African soldier rise, not with weapons, not with threats, but with presence. He began to speak, slowly, softly, like a man holding back tears and fire at the same time. "My people taught me this. Dignity is not given. It is earned." He paused. "And when those with power refuse to sit beside us, it's not because they fear who we are. It's because they refuse to see us as equals." You could hear people breathing. Some were crying quietly. Some were staring, frozen like statues. "But I did not come here to ask for approval," Traoré said. "I came to demand justice, not just for Burkina Faso, but for every land whose voice has been silenced for far too long." At the front row, a woman, once skeptical, arms folded, now stood and clapped. Another followed, then another, and in a matter of seconds, the whole room rose. A standing ovation. The cameras caught every second. Live streams flooded every corner of the globe. Twitter, YouTube, WhatsApp. Even those who had never heard of Burkina Faso now knew its heartbeat. But Traoré didn't soak in the applause. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. He only looked out at the sea of faces and said, "In Burkina Faso, children walk miles for water. Mothers bury their hopes with their babies. We do not live in reports or headlines. We live in hunger, in hope, in resistance." And then came the line, the one that would echo far beyond that room. "We will not be ignored any longer." That was when a single tear fell from his eye. Not weakness, not pity, just truth. And that truth traveled, not just through speakers and screens, but into hearts. Across continents, people shared that moment, not because it was viral, but because it was real. On the streets outside, the chants grew louder. "Justice for Africa. We see you, Traoré." Truth is louder. Inside, chaos broke protocol. Delegates whispered. Some pulled out their phones to post what they just heard. A few reached for tissues. But no one, not one person, spoke over him. And then announcement. The UN summit would hold a surprise press conference. Unplanned. Urgent. The world tuned in. Traoré stepped forward. Behind him was not a flag or a team of guards. Just him. Alone. But never more seen. He spoke not as a politician. Not even as a president. But as a witness to pain. As a servant of people. "I do not stand here to divide," he began, voice low, "but to unite. To remind us all that true leadership is not measured by how many soldiers follow you, but how many children survive because of you." He looked straight into the cameras. This is not about West versus East, not about left versus right. This is about the farmer who lost his land, the student who never got to graduate, the old man who died waiting for a promise. Then, for the first time since the summit began, he smiled. Not big, not loud, but soft. Humble. Real. If you feel what Traoré stands for, don't scroll past this moment. Share his words. Speak his name. Let the world hear what dignity sounds like. The headlines the next day didn't talk about policy or climate. They said, Traoré's triumph, when silence spoke louder than power. Trump walks out, but Traoré stands tall. Africa's youngest leader shakes the world with just words. In classrooms, teachers showed the clip to students. In churches, prayers were said for Burkina Faso. And in quiet cafes, strangers spoke about what leadership really means. Traoré returned to his hotel that night, not with security guards, but with a heavy heart and steady hands. In a quiet corner, a young aide approached. "Captain," she said softly, "they're inspired. But not everyone is happy. So I want to silence this." He looked out the window, where people still held candles in the dark, chanting his name. "This is only the beginning," he whispered. "Truth has a way of breaking walls. But the path, it will be hard." He thought of the ones who didn't survive the fight, the friends who had vanished, the nights he stayed awake, wondering if it was worth it. And then he remembered the barefoot children playing under the sun with nothing but laughter in their pockets. That's who he did this for. For them, he would keep standing. For them, he would keep speaking. And for the world, he had already said enough. Now is our turn. If you've read this far, it means something inside you understands what's at stake. Like this video, share it. Not for me, not for Traoré, but for every quiet voice the world tried to silence. Because the question is no longer, what did Traoré say? The real question is, what will we say when it's our turn?